Welcome back to Gerodynamics. Okay, so I know it's been a while since my last video. That's a common thing though, been even longer since my last political video. But that is what we are jumping into today, as we are going to start with a political video. I do have a bunch of other videos planned and a lot of free time next week. I'm off next week, so I'll be getting into that later. But let's just jump into the political video. And same warning as I used to do. If you're not into the politics and you don't really want to hear that, no worries. I do have movie reviews, sorcery, Magic the Gathering videos, other sorts of videos coming out in the next couple of days. All right, let's go. So, I haven't done a political video in a while. A lot has happened since my last political video. Of course, the biggest thing is the election, and Trump won the election. He is going to be the president in January. He'll be back in office. The Republicans won the Senate. It should be 53-47, I believe. The Pennsylvania race was going to be a recount, but I just saw that the Democrat has finally conceded the race, so I don't know if they're going to move forward with that recount or if maybe it already happened and I didn't realize it. But the Pennsylvania Senate race is probably going to stay with the Republican. Arizona, I thought, was going to do a recount, but I haven't read or heard anything about that in a while, so maybe they're not. And if that's the case, then the Democrats have retained the Senate seat in Arizona. So we're looking at 53-47 in the Senate. In the House, I think right now it's 219, 213. I think there's three elections still pending, including my very own. The House race where I live, where I voted, is still, I guess it's like within a couple of hundred votes, or a little over a couple hundred votes, and right now it's leaning towards the Republican retaining that office. I believe that's what's going to happen, but Nancy Pelosi's daughter came down here and was sticking her nose into it, and it narrowed. So that's kind of shady, but hopefully we don't have to worry about that. There could be a couple of House elections that are going to have to go to recounts, such as mine, which is crazy because they're still counting it the first time. There's another California race that's really close, that's leaning towards the Democrat, but that one could probably go either way too. And then I think it's Iowa. I think there's one last race in Iowa or Ohio, but I think the Ohio one just got called for the Democrat, I think. And so I think the one that's still outstanding is the one in Iowa, which is leaning towards the Republican. Also extremely close. They would have announced them long ago if they weren't close races. And so we're looking at three races, two probably going to the Republicans, one going to the Democrats. So the House is looking like it's going to be 221 to 214. I think that's is that the right number? 515? Anyways, but the House is, so the Republicans have the presidency, the Senate, the House. Some say they have the Supreme Court. Technically speaking, it is more of a conservative leaning Supreme Court, but that's not the way it always goes. But we'll just say that they technically have the power in the Supreme Court. So Trump should have a solid 2 years to get some things done. The faster the better on some of these things, because some of them could get held up, and then they'll refocus onto new priorities. So the quicker these things get done, the more likely they are to get done. And so that's what we're looking at in this video. What should be the priorities as soon as Trump takes office? Less partisan, less political, more policies, and what should we really be looking to accomplish? And mind you, I mean, it's coming from more of a right-leaning perspective. I'm a libertarian, but I did vote Republican in this election. I voted for Trump for the first time, just to kind of get that out of the way. I know people who've seen my videos before know that. But yeah, so that's my perspective on it, and so these are the things that I think he should get done. If you're left-leaning, maybe your perspective is, preventing these things, or maybe trying to encourage him to do some of the things that maybe you more agree with that he could possibly go with, especially in like compromises. So that's something to think about as well. But yeah, so this is my take on it. So what needs to be done once Trump takes office? One of those things which should be the number one priority is cutting spending. But what do you think the number one priority should be? No, I really am. I'm really asking. I would like to know your perspective. And so if you feel like commenting down below, just on that or off of the rest of this video, please feel free. My priority is cutting spending, and that kind of goes hand in hand with tax cuts. But let me kind of explain my reasoning for going with cutting spending first. We've seen tax cuts in the past where they did the tax cuts and never did the spending cuts. Not that they weren't successful, they were. But when you want to have the direct impact on reducing the deficit, we really, really need those spending cuts. And that's the most important thing to me, getting us out of this debt, getting knocking out these deficits, getting the spending under control, and limiting the size and scope of the government. So that's my big priorities. And we have a very high profile situation going on with Trump saying that he has asked Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy to come in and lead a new group. Now, my understanding is they're not officially part of the cabinet. It's not an official department. This is just kind of a advisory board that he is putting together, and that advisory board is going to advise him as the chief executive, as the president, on where he should be cutting, what departments he should be eliminating, if there's specific positions that he can eliminate, where he can cut spending, where he can cut the size of the government, streamline it, consolidate departments, things like that. So that's what Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy are going to do. I know I'm pronouncing that last name. It's Vivek, like cake. I remember him saying that. Ramaswamy is maybe not the way his last name's pronounced. I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing it. I really do like the guy. And so, yeah. Anyways. So Vivek and Elon are going to be leading this. They also are going to have a partner in Congress. So Congress is actually going to create a team. I'm forgetting what the name, a committee. I'm not sure what they're calling it, what kind of team. But it looks like it's going to be headed up by Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's not my favorite, but I think she's going to be good in this position. She has a background in business as well, and she's no nonsense, and she wants to cut the size of government, more than a lot of people in the House. They probably should have looked at maybe someone more like Massey, but hey, here we are, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and we'll take a look at wait, was there anything else I wanted to say about this? Basically, we want to streamline, we want to make the government more efficient, get it out of the way, and here is why. So I would like to point out my amazing sweater, which I've worn in previous videos, but I haven't worn in a while because, it hasn't been cold. And also, this is more of a political video, so it makes more sense. But we have Milei here. Javier Milei is the president of Argentina. He is famous for his afuera thing that he was doing for a while there. But basically, this guy has been the president of Argentina for about a year now, almost a year. And since he has taken office, he has caused it's saying trade surplus. So I'm assuming it's not, because they don't know what his budget surplus is going to be based on, taxes and spending cuts. I would imagine because, the whole year hasn't taken place, or, I'm not sure if there was a prior budget, and when his budget takes effect, I'm not quite sure how Argentina's work. In America, our budget is an October to October thing. So, like Trump coming into the office, he's going to be cutting things here and there, but his actual full budget that he will finally be able to sign won't be until October. Now, if I'm not mistaken, they may be on a continuance where they just had the budget carry over and maybe made a couple of changes. So they may actually still need to pass the official budget once the for this budgetary year, once the new Congress takes effect. I'm not 100% sure about that. I haven't looked at that in a minute. But if not, then he won't pass his full budget until October. Anyways, I'm not quite sure how Argentina's works, but that's, it's probably something similar. Some sort of fiscal year, not an annual type year. Anyway, so I'm assuming they're talking about the actual trade surplus, since that's what they're saying. He started office with a trade deficit of $442 million. He now has a trade surplus of $888 million. That's from him coming into office, from him cutting spending, cutting out red tape, getting out of the way of businesses to allow businesses to thrive. That's how he has accomplished this. And these are things that Donald Trump, Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, Marjorie Taylor Greene, they all want to do this. They all want to free up our economy. They all want to get the government out of the way, and they want to improve our trade in a way that we benefit. But keep in mind, when you're looking at what Milei has done, it did result in a increase of 30% on exports. That's huge. 30% increase on their exports, but it also resulted in a 4.9% increase on imports. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to cut out all imports. And in fact, an increase just shows just how strong their economy is starting to get after it had struggled for so long. And this is what I want to see here in the United States as well. Some of the other things that Milei has accomplished while he's been there is a 40%, a drop in 40% in real terms of the supply of rental properties in the Buenos Aires area. Wait, the price of rent has dropped 40%. Sorry. So the price of rent has dropped 40% in real terms. Something that we are dealing with here, and doesn't really get talked about as much. People usually talk about the price of homes. People talk about the cost of living. Well, a big part of the cost of living is the price of rent, and rent has been like jumping up, at least in my area, and I'm assuming across the country. These are things that we want to accomplish: is bring down the price of rent throughout the country, and he has accomplished that. He has dropped it 40%. Now theirs was in a much worse situation than ours, but still, it's that's something that you can see. These are successes. And then on top of that, it's this is what I was meaning. This is what I was reading previously. Supply of rental properties in the Buenos Aires area has increased by over 300% due to eliminating rent controls. And so I don't think we have a whole lot in the way of rent controls. If we do, we should be working on eliminating them. But getting Donald Trump into office prevented the rent controls that Kamala Harris was proposing. She was proposing a lot of price controls, but rent controls was a big one of them. You implement rent control, you start actually seeing less rental properties, the prices of rent going up. It's not a positive. It's not what they think. The good intentions are not met with success. All right, so basically, Trump, Elon, and Vivek are all three fans of Javier, and he is a partner of ours in South America, a strong partner of ours, and that's a great thing. Moving forward, we can definitely work more with Argentina, and doing a similar approach. We should have similar effects or similar outcomes. We shall see, but that's the goal. So that's why spending cuts is the number one priority for me. Besides that, let's go ahead and take a look at that number two priority, which I kind of already mentioned already, and that is cutting taxes. So other than cutting spending, almost hand in hand, but I put cutting spending above it, is cutting taxes. What about you? What would your number two type of priority be? Would it be along the same lines, cutting spending, cutting taxes, or do you have other things that you'd like him? Not that he can't focus on more than one thing at a time, but these are our priorities. These are the things that we need to get done, and as quickly as possible. Cutting taxes is one of those things that hopefully they could get done, in the meantime, but may need to wait till October. So that's another reason why, making it number two is not the worst thing in the world. I have some very outside the box thinking as far as tax cuts, and I've seen other people have similar ideas, so I'm not the only one. It's not I'm not saying I'm like super special and the only one who can think of these things, but me. When I think of tax cuts, what I think is, we probably shouldn't jump off the deep end right at the very beginning, and there's been some mention of completely eliminating the income tax. Now, mind you, just kind of to touch on this a little bit, eliminating the income tax can be done. And it's something that I think I may have talked about in a previous video. I could definitely go in depth about it. It could be done. Um, Eliminating it permanently requires a constitutional amendment, because there is an amendment that allows for the United States government to collect income tax. And that is the 16th Amendment. Yeah, I think so. The 16th Amendment. So that would need to be repealed to prevent the next administration from just re-implementing it. But maybe we don't want to jump into that just yet. Not to mention the fact that passing an amendment is extremely difficult, would require a huge wave of popularity, and having some success could lead to that popularity. If we cut or eliminated income taxes and then it failed miserably, then there's no way you would get the amendment passed, and you shouldn't. But this is my thought on it. You start with like a flat tax, right? And steep cuts, but a really low percentage on that flat tax. Show that even with the flat tax and other aspects that they would take into effect as far as trying to generate revenues such as tariffs. Obviously, that's a big talking point, tariffs, but there are others. You can still generate revenue, and then also you wouldn't need the level of revenue if you're cutting spending drastically. So that's a whole nother thing to take into consideration. But let's focus on the tax cuts. So let's say we start with a 15% flat tax. A couple of things about a 15% flat tax. 15% is higher than the lowest tax bracket, right? The lowest tax bracket is 10%. That's only on, let me see if I can pull this one out of my head. I think it's like $11,000, $11,300 for a, I think that's the exact amount, actually. Yes, I'm probably pretty good at this. $11,300, if I remember correctly, is the single, married filing separate. That's where the 10% tax bracket ends. And then for married filing joint, it's double, so it's 22,600. If it's 11,300, 22,600 sounds right. For the married filing joint, that's where the 10% up to that is 10%. Then for now, keep in mind that's without taking into consideration standard deductions and things like that. But when we're talking about a flat tax, a lot of those things may go away. Anyways, then you're looking at head of household, and I think head of household is like 16.4, 16.8, somewhere around there. And so you have this gap of income. Let's just say, to cover all the bases, let's say about $20,000. Where if you implemented a flat tax of 15%, you're looking at a tax increase on these people. We want to 100% avoid any tax increases. That's the last thing you want to do as far as optics go, to say, you know what, I'm cutting taxes on everybody except for this lowest income bracket. They're getting screwed. So I think the flat tax should probably have some income that's opted out of that flat tax. So we won't do a complete opt out of income tax, but there is some income that we could opt out of the flat tax. And one of those would be your first $20,000 of income. So if you only make $20,000, say you're a high school kid, you're working part time at at a fast food place, your first $20,000 of income is not taxable. It's below the threshold of tax, taxing at 10%, right? So that could be one thing. So first $20,000, no tax. You could have no tax on tips, which is something that Trump has talked about. No tax on overtime. That's a whole different story. That's not really having to do with what I'm talking about right now, but it is something he's talked about, doing no tax on overtime. That's more to encourage businesses to offer overtime and to encourage employees to work overtime, which is something that helps the economy. So that's why he's talking about no tax on overtime. No tax on Social Security. And I will come back to Social Security, although I think I may need to cut this video and start again because I don't want this video getting super long. So this may be part one, and then we'll do part two. So Social Security may be in part two. In fact, I think after I get done talking about tax cuts, I'll stop and then I'll start with the rest of the video. Okay, so Social Security should be opted out of the tax, and that's something Trump has already talked about. But as far as my whole idea for what should be done with Social Security, that's something that should be happening anyways. But we'll come back to that. So these are some of the things that you can opt out of the income tax, that even the flat rate, to kind of give you an idea of what's going to happen when we opt everybody out of income tax. Here's another thing. This one is way outside the box. I think I've mentioned it in previous videos. I don't hear too many people talking about this. In fact, nobody talks about it exactly the same way. So this is something that I've kind of, came up with without hearing this, but I've heard some people say something similar. Reparations. Reparations has been something that's been talked about, obviously, since the Civil War. And reparations was something that the United States government promised to slaves to say, to try to make up. You can't make up for what happened to them, but, to try to, benefit them after they left slavery, to give them a start so that, they're not slaves anymore, but they have nothing, they have nowhere to start from. Well, that was what it was supposed to do. Didn't really take effect too much. There were some things that happened, but definitely the whole concept of 40 acres and a mule to every slave didn't happen, right? So to this day, reparations is a conversation, and it can get heated, and this is not a solution that either side would be super happy with, but it's something that maybe we could finally move forward as a nation. Reparations could be tax, and reparations could be basically saying if you are if you had an ancestor who was a slave, then you would be opted out of income tax, just across the board. And so that's something to consider, as an olive branch. I mean, it's not what they, or not. The people who want reparations or are fighting for reparations want cash. They want a payout, a large payout, actually. Something that just is not financially feasible, doesn't really make sense. And something that I wouldn't support, but something like this, I could definitely see. Just have them be able to opt out of income tax as a way to, make up for what happened to their ancestors, that might have, put them in a position where they do not have the same starting, the same starting point that people who didn't have ancestors who were slaves had. Not that my family, had a huge advantage. We didn't get here until after slavery. My family came over from Ireland. They were very poor, but they weren't slaves. So, I would never say that it's the same. I'm just saying that my family wouldn't have the step ahead that, you might talk about as far as someone whose family started out as not slaves back at the same time that were slaves. Anyways. Reparations is something that you could probably throw in, and that's really kind of gotten this video off topic a little bit, but just something to think about. What I'd like to see is maybe like a stepped flat tax. So the first year, Trump's first year, go ahead and implement a 15% flat tax, and then we can take a look at it, see how everything's going, or kind of implement it at the very beginning with maybe some opt-outs or some changes that could happen. And then the second year it's 10%, third year it's 5%, fourth year we try zero income tax, something like that, just to see how things go, to try to use some of the revenue to pay down our debts and deficits. and just to see how we could go moving forward. You know, obviously there will need to be other revenue sources, tariffs, sales, some sort of you know, items that could be sold you know, as a government level, like you know, land. You know, there's ways to offset the what would you would imagine would be a loss of revenue. Now, if the only thing we did was a flat tax, you may not lose any revenue, right? If that was the only change, um, because oftentimes, and people miss this, a lot of tax revenue is generally based off GDP as opposed to percentage of the tax rate. And so, if our GDP is rising and our tax rate is falling, you may not see the revenue decreases that you think you're going to see. In fact, when Trump did his tax cuts in 2016, he decreased tax rates, and we saw revenue increase even after that. We saw revenue increases until the pandemic, where they had to close businesses. So you had revenue increases even after the 2016 tax cuts. So, you know, this is not something new here. You could still see revenue increases. You could see revenue stay about the same. If you do drastic tax cuts other than the flat tax, or you do some other things, you could see some revenue decreases. But again, we are cutting spending. So let's see what happens. That's my idea. Number one. Number two, cut spending, cut taxes. And was there anything else I wanted to say before I end this one? Let's see. All right, I think that is it. So yeah, that's what I'm thinking, you know. And if it's successful, we could see a possibility, you know, implementing an amendment that eliminates the income tax altogether. We could implement an amendment that forces a balanced budget amendment. These are things that we could do, especially if you show success in your, you know, in your plans of changing the taxes in such a drastic way. All right, everybody, my next video, I'll keep talking about the things we should be doing moving forward. All right, everybody, take care. Have a good day.